The Choir in the Walls. Chapter 1. The Water Remembers. The first time the bell rang, there was no bell. The drought had drawn the lake back like a curtain, revealing the bones of the drowned town in a bruise-colored sunrise. Pews, fence posts, an iron bed frame twisted like a crown of thorns, the black geometry of a roofline punched through by drift and time. And, at the center of the bowl of cracked mud, the church steeple rose half, not whole. The spire sheared off by a long-ago dynamite charge, when the dam had closed and the valley had been offered to the reservoir with a bureaucrat's signature. The clapperless brass still lay somewhere under silt and carp bones, yet the sound traveled thin as a hair. One note, then another, then silence, like a breath held. June Tran heard it through the wind before she felt it in her teeth. She stood on the new shoreline with a pelican case open at her boots, and hard foam cradling her microphones like sleeping animals. Clouds spidered across the sky. The sun was a pale coin shrugged by smoke. It smelled of iron and algae, of fish scaled in dust, her hydrophone coiled slick and black like a water snake. She had come because the reservoir was withering, and the past had been exhumed not by intention but by thirst. She had come because stories grow loud when they are almost gone, and because her mother had sung here, once upon a time, until a night of rain had turned a town into a memory, and a daughter into the kind of woman who goes back when everyone says, "Go forward." The ranger who drove her out in a dust-spitting ATV promised 3 hours on site before the county sealed the area for safety. "Old wells," he said. "Cellars, sinkholes, rebar. Locals keep trying for souvenirs. We found a man last week chewing a piece of stained glass for the color," he said. He had a mug of coffee that steamed even in the late heat. He smelled like rope, creosote, and the ghosts of cigarettes. "You a journalist?" He was them stand. "An audio ethnographer," June said, because that sounded less predatory than storyteller and more dignified than woman with a lavalier mic and a need. "I collect how places speak." The ranger laughed a small, brittle laugh and said, "Places don't speak, people do," and drove off in a swallow of engine cough and dust that hung in the light like old breath. He left her a two-way radio, a map inked with red X's where basements had become traps, and the admonition to be back at the access road by noon. "If you get turned around, follow the blue tape on the rebar stakes. This used to be Maple Street, or maybe Birch." He shrugged. "They replanted the trees somewhere else." "Hey, Jas." June lifted her recorder, the old solid black one she trusted more than the sleek new models with their belief in their own perfection. 15 years of interviews lived in its scuffed corners, grandmothers in Vietnamese temples reciting prayers that sounded like rain against stone, a former slaughterhouse worker who wept describing the day he'd stopped singing to the animals, a group of teenagers in a floodplain subdivision who had invented a whistle language to talk across the river when the bridge went down. June had learned to hear the undersound of a place, the way a room hummed around the people in it like a throat that had not yet decided to speak. She clipped the wind muffs on. The reservoir's exposed terraces were ringed with stranded boats, the ghosts of fishers' weekends. Out on the silt, a rusted refrigerator fell on its face like a toppled altar. A little further, something that might have been a merry-go-round lay half drowned in mud, its horse's poles skeletal. "Rook," her mother had called it, as if the word itself could bruise a mouth. Rook Valley, Rook Creek, Rook Dam. When June had searched the state archive the week before, she had found a photograph of her mother 18 paper thin, beauty like a blade standing on the church steps with a hymnal clutched to her chest. The caption identified the congregation in tidy type, Street, Bridget of the Waters, 1973. A year before the closing, a year before the roar. June set the recorder to stand by. In the hush, after the ranger's departure, the sounds rose. Crickets, a far engine, something moving slow in the silt, maybe a turtle, maybe the idea of one. She stepped off the gravel onto the cracked mud. A film of salt folded under her boots. She planted her tripod near the steeple base and worked at the boards that had been nailed over the mouth of what used to be the vestibule. The wood had desiccated into splinters that came away like old scabs. She tore a hole big enough to duck through, and the dark swallowed the light like someone drinking fast. Inside, the air was 15 degrees cooler, and the silence had a shape. June breathed, listened. Her eyes adjusted to the blue-gray. The roof was mostly gone, but the ribs of the beams made a skeletal vault. Birds had come and gone for years, seeding nests in the rafters. Underfoot, silt over marble over silt made a shifting, treacherous plain. The altar stone was ghosted with luminous algae that pulsed, a relic of a lake that had withdrawn its tongue but left its saliva. On the north wall, the marks where velvet banners had hung were darker than the surrounding plaster, a negative stenciling of devotion. The confession booth had lost a door. Something had nested inside, a geometry of sticks. And, like a wound sealed badly, a patch of newish boards upon the east wall was painted the red of a too-ripe apple. June swallowed. The wall should have opened onto the sacristy. The sacristy should have opened onto the steps that descended to the cellar where the parish records had been kept. The records had not been saved. That was in the article she had found online. All papers lost, all registers drowned, all names carried to the river's uterine forgetting. But the red boards were not there in the photograph. She set the recorder to roll. Her own voice returned to her through the fine foam of the pop screen. Entry, June Tran, Rook Reservoir, Street Bridget, timestamp 0811. Her words wavered against the cavern. There's a note, she said without meaning to say it, because there was. It hung in the air like a cobweb. You only notice after you've walked through it. A half sound, as if the room were intoning to itself in a register just below hearing. June's mother had been the one who hummed while she braided June's hair. Low, habitual, a habit like prayer. The last year, when the notices came, your home will be acquired by right of eminent domain, and the men in tan uniforms came with their soft voices and tape measures and maps. We'll get somewhere prettier. Her mother had lied, laughter turning brittle and sharp as an eggshell. We'll be lakeside. The bell rang again where there was no bell. It shivered June's jaw. Then a bar of quiet. Then, just to prove it was not accident a third time, a fraction lower. June pulled off her headphones, then put them back on. The meter saw nothing but her breath. The note was in the room and not in the device. She walked toward the red boards because people always walk toward the wrong thing in stories, and June knew stories even when she lied to herself that she was only collecting them. The boards were not nailed so much as persuaded into place, each hammered in with a different amateurism. Someone had painted over the cracks. The paint had dried irregular, thicker in the center, thinning at the edges. June set her hand against it and felt a faint chill, like a cheek in fever if the fever were elsewhere. She pressed harder. Something like air moved on the other side, or something that believed itself to be air. "Don't sing back," an old voice said, and June jerked so hard she smacked her shoulder against the pew. A woman stood in the shadow of the transept, thin as a thought, a skeletal umbrella folded in one liver-spotted hand. She wore a black dress, a decade out of time, stockings latticed with careful darning. Her face had shrunk to its essentials. She was the age of someone who had already buried too much. "I thought you were with the county," she said, disappointment flattening the words. "I'm not," June said. She didn't know whether to say my mother sang here or I am here to put your grief in a jar. "I'm recording," she settled on, and lifted the mic as if that were a confession. The old woman's eyes slid to the red door. "Father Jonas said he would paint it until the paint learned to remember. I told him paint doesn't have a soul, but what do I know? I only buried my daughter in a place no shovel can touch." She came closer without seeming to. "Don't sing back," she repeated. "What happens if I do?" June asked softly. "You might not stop." The woman gave a laugh that wasn't. "I was choir here," she added, a flicker of pride under the wreckage of her tone. "Altos. We were 30 voices when the water came, 30 becoming a roar. We sang a hymn at the last service so loud the birds fell off the rafters stunned. Father said loudness is no virtue, but sometimes it is all we have left." She lifted her umbrella like a baton. "June Tran?" The name struck June with a child's astonishment. "How did you—" "Your mother." She had a voice birds would gossip about. The men in the county office would hold their pens wrong after she sang. She could make straight things crooked. One doesn't forget a voice like that or the child who clung to her skirt like a barnacle. The woman's gaze softened in a way that hurt. "I'm Alma Rook," she said. "My father's father's father put the first fence posts in this valley. Then they named the valley after us as a consolation prize for taking it. The shrug spanned a century. If you're here to take sound, take it fast. The rangers will come back with their tape and their notices. They like their lines straight." She stepped back toward the transept. "Leave the red alone. Names live behind it." "Names?" June asked, but Alma was already turning. She left June to the room's hum and the way the light faltered where the roof had been. June knelt and arranged her microphones in a fan like a priest setting vessels on an altar. She walked the aisles and read the peeling paint where it had blistered into topographies like dead seas. She whispered her own name to hear what the room would do with it. It took her syllables and bent them, then returned them to her changed Little Reed, as her mother had called her, La No, when she had been small enough to disappear in tall grass if she lay very still. June threaded the hydrophone down through a crack where black water shone. It took and took the cable until her fingers felt the tug of a current below. She recorded 10 minutes of the reservoir inside the church under the silt. In that recording, the water clicked and hissed. Something knocked a slow code against a submerged pipe. A far fish sang in a voice that wasn't a fish. On her headphones, the lake sounded like an old woman washing a dress in a basin and wringing it until the threads begged. Somewhere deep in that undernoise, a series of tones rose pure, distinct, ordered as an exercise. "Do not sing back," Alma had said, "but the urge to answer a call is one of the oldest animal impulses. How long, O Lord, how long?" the psalm goes, and if there is a call, there must be a reply, or else the world is only echo without origin, and that was worse, June thought, because it would mean there was no voice first, only reflections. She played the tones back through the little speaker on her recorder. The notes came, soft, failing into the heat. On the third repetition, a fourth note joined that she had not put there. On the fifth, another. On the 7th, the room arranged itself around the scale like a mouth learning a word. Names live behind it, Alma had said. June lifted the mic toward the red boards and felt the hair on her forearms stand. "Is anyone here?" she said, and winced at her own cliché, and waited for the room to punish her for it. There was the sense of a weight shifting, like someone standing up after sitting in water too long. And then, more shocking than any answer would have been, there was singing low, a hum at first, then a melody that wasn't a melody until the second voice joined it, and the third made a chord. It came from the walls, from the silt in the nave, from the cavity behind the red boards, yes, and from the air itself, the way heat sometimes speaks in a mirage. It was human, and more than it was relief and seduction. June knew the shape of the harmony, though she had never heard it. B minor, lifting, the old Irish tune, Street Bridget's Well, but pulled through some other mode, something older. The words were not English. They might have been Latin. They might have been water. Her mother had kept a songbook near the stove, its pages splayed with humidity. The first time June had touched it after the move, after the boats and bulldozers and the men with their clipboards, her mother had taken it from her, gentle but firm. "Some things don't travel well," she'd said. June recorded. A tear slid without drama down past her left ear. She did not know whether she was moved or frightened, or simply seeing a shape she had only known from its negative. The choir filled the space without changing the volume on her meter. The needle stayed steady and indifferent, as if what was happening had nothing to do with sound. "Can you say your names?" June asked, because asking names is asking for mercy. Names are a place to stand. The singing stopped like a door, all at once, leaving the absence of it in June's mouth. Then a whisper. Many whispers, the S's like seagrass, names said once and layered, the way you might lay flowers in a river. Alma's daughter, Father Jonas. Miriam, who boiled sheets, Thomas Rook. Names that belonged to this valley, and names June had seen in the archive, and names the archive had lost. June's hands shook, so she put them on her knees. She said, "Teeth, thank you," and swallowed her own stutter because fear had moved from idea into body. "Little Reed," a voice said in Vietnamese, near her ear. June turned, knocking her knee against the pew. No one. Not Alma, who had been real and arthritic and in black. Not the ranger, not the comfort of an animal. The voice had been the exact weight of home and the exact tone of the woman who had taught her the lie of Lakeside. "Ma?" June said, the smallest syllable she had ever offered to the air. A laugh that was a sob lifted in the wall and then quieted like a hand. June approached the red boards. She pressed her ear. Behind them, a coolness breathed. And then, as if the boards had learned ears under their paint, someone whispered a measure of the hymn, just the pickup, the breath before the word, and June found herself answering not with words but with the shape of one. That, oh, that isn't an O but the place in the throat where an O would come. Do not sing back. But prohibition is hunger's shadow. June hummed, just once, an unconscious matching of the A that the boards breathed. The room listened. The walls leaned. The recorder's antenna kissed her cheek. Something else woke. It was not a sound, not first. It was a direction, which is a kind of mercy. The heat gathered itself in one place, then withdrew. The light paused, then thickened. The silt settled as if a foot had pressed down from below. June took a step back, because stepping back is another animal impulse we forget we have trained out of ourselves. The red boards ballooned a whispering fraction and exhaled. The exhale smelled like old rope, like wet leather and iron and lilies left too long in their vase. The recorder found nothing of it. The recorder is a liar, she thought without anger, because it cannot help itself. The bell chimed again. June felt it now, in the brass ring she wore on a chain around her neck, the ring her mother had kept in the drawer of the sewing machine, the one she had said was not a wedding ring but a promise ring from someone before, someone she would not name. The ring warmed as if a hand had closed around it. She tucked it under her shirt and the heat darkened like cooling tea. "Miss Tran?" Alma's voice floated from the vestibule. "You shouldn't put your ear where your name can be reached." June left the altar and the boards and the breath. She found Alma not looking into the church but at the far wall, where light stuttered through the broken roof. The old woman's eyes were bright with unspent panic. "They like names," Alma said, biting off the pronoun the way an older generation bites off a curse. "They use them like a hook to pull. We called the well Street Bridget because calling something saints only ever slows it a little. The well was sweet, and it took what it was given. And then when the lake came, it grew a hunger we had not known to fear. In summer we would lower buckets and sing to keep the rope from yawning. They liked us then. We were company. But the water's different, Miss Tran. It goes everywhere without asking permission. It is a ruin we chose. They prefer what is chosen." June wanted rules the way a child wants a hand. "Who are they?" she asked, knowing that the answer would be either too big or too small. Alma made a face like someone tasting something spoiled. "The choir," she said simply. "Us and not us. The ones who did not have time to turn into stories. The ones who were mid-breath. The ones the paperwork lost. They like to sing in a chord because a chord is a ladder." "Out?" June asked. The hope sounded foolish as soon as she said it. "In," Alma said. They stood together in the church that was a ruin that had become a shrine because people needed somewhere to put what did not fit in their kitchens. The air thickened once more. The red boards trembled. June set her chest against the wanting of the room and named names under her breath, not the names she had been given in the whisper, but the names of the living, the ones that tie a person to a day. Her neighbor who watered her succulents when she traveled, the woman who roasted coffee on the corner and burned it always, the bus driver with 2 different shoes, naming as exorcism, naming as a net on sensible posts. The board stilled. From under the floor, something knocked, slow, deliberate, 3 times. June counted them out with the metronome of her blood. She thought, with sudden furious clarity, of the girls in the youth choir, fringe on their shawls, the cluck of tongues against the roof of their mouths, to find notes together. How thin they would have been when the water came. How quick. She stowed the hydrophone, the mic. She stepped backward, one measured pace, then another, as if leaving a dangerous animal her respect. Alma watched her with a captured nod. "You'll come back," the old woman said, and it was less prediction than indictment. "I'll bring new tape," June heard herself answer, as if her will were a needle dropped, and the old groove was the only track there was. On the way out, she touched the font. A circle of ash and real water had collected there, evaporating to a ring. The world outside burned white. Fish lay in long silver blinks in the shade. The wind picked up and sailed a piece of hymn book paper past her boot. It carouseled and settled. June looked down. The note was written in a hand she knew because it was the hand that had written grocery lists and messages in lipstick on the mirror. "Don't sing back." She swallowed something iron and picked up the paper. She put it in her breast pocket, where it made a ridiculous triangle. The ranger's ATV came toward her across the broken field, one wheel bucking at a seam. She wiped her eyes as if it were only dust that had come to live there. "Find what you wanted?" he called over the engine. The wind inventoried him. Sweat, coffee, ghosts. The sun had pulled a halo of salt on his hat brim. She thought of saying no. She thought of saying, "I wanted my mother." She said, "I found a choir." He laughed like a coffee spilling. "I'll add them to the hazards. Watch your step. Don't fall in." He tapped the map with a thick finger. "You see those X's? That's where the basement walls still think they're walls. They remember. But ceilings forget. They come down when you breathe wrong. See." They drove back to the access road with the heat turning the world into an instrument. Each rattle of the ATV found a resonance in spine, in teeth. As they ascended, the exposed town flattened into a pattern, then into a bruise, then a color. The lake glittered at its edges like a lyre. At the motel that had repurposed its sign so that vacancy blinked like a fainting heart, June laid her equipment out on the bedspread and checked cables with the tenderness of someone touching a sleeping child. She washed her face and mouth and then washed them again as if the lake were a smell that obeyed soap. She set the recorder on the table and began to log the day's audio. Sunlight cut the room diagonally. A moth thudded against the window screen with the idiot insistence of things that cannot learn new routes to light. At 2:17 into the second file, June's mother's voice said, "June, baby, clear enough to tilt the world." June's hand hovered above the keyboard, then fell to her lap like it belonged to someone else. She rewound, played it again. The voice had her mother's cadence, the breath like the breath of a singer who had not yet come out from behind the note. There was no other room tone in the clip. No hiss, no birds, no engine. Just the intimate space of a voice 6 inches from the mic. "June, baby," it said. And then a second phrase, low, that clipped with the ceiling of the recorder's limiters and became a smear. She killed the limiter and listened again. "Do not," it might have been. Or, "do as." The end of the word broke the way a wave breaks and takes whatever small things are not held. "Ma," she said, because she had already said it in the church and because to say it again was to admit that her life was now in 2 halves, and the knife had fallen somewhere between the ranger's warning and this cheap motel chair. Her phone chimed, an ordinary trill that believed in lunchtime. It was a text from an unknown number with a local prefix, a photo of the red boards at the church, taken from inside the nave, framed perfectly. Then another photo with a change so small, June first thought it was compression artifact. A sliver, a seam, a new line between 2 boards where a nail had lifted the thickness of a fingernail. Then a third photo, the seam wider, the darkness behind it dense as felt. She typed, "Who is this?" and erased it. She typed, "I do not sing back," and erased that too. She typed a name she had not heard in years because she had learned too well a certain kind of obedience, Alma, and sent it. The typing ellipsis blinked for a long time, like a fish testing air. A reply came, "We are water. We know the shape of your mouth." June's throat closed like a fist. She put the phone face down and turned the recorder's volume low and then high, as if manipulating the physical world could change what the world had decided to be. Outside, a truck pulled into the lot, and a couple fought about whether anyone ever listened. The motel ice machine hiccuped a cube. On the wall, behind cheap framed art of a lake that was clearly a lake and not a reservoir, there came a sound like someone had slid a fingertip along the paint from left to right, testing whether the plaster would remember touch. She pressed her ear to it because she was that kind of woman, the kind a mother loves because she is brave and worries about at night because she is brave. From the wall, her own voice whispered back to her in a cadence she had never heard herself use. "June," it said. "Don't." The sentence ended with the sound she had recorded in the church, the breath before the word. Evening oiled the sky. Crickets discovered themselves. June ate a sandwich in 3 bites and could not have said afterward what it had contained. She sat on the bed with her back against the headboard and read the same sentence of an email from her editor until the words had no meaning and the letters looked like shapes invented by an insect. She wrote a list of the names she had heard in the church, then the names of her living. Her father, who had left the valley early, before the notices, who was a place sometimes and not a man. Her sister, who renamed herself after a city, who said June loved ruins more than people. Her neighbor, the bus driver, naming as if she were a person on a boat throwing ballast, making a shape that might ride a wave upright, rather than be rolled and rolled until everything inside her mixed to one color. At 11:48 p.m., the bell rang again. June did not so much hear it as remember hearing it. It placed itself in her mouth. It sat in her teeth. The glass on the framed print murmured. June picked up her keys and the recorder and the card that would let her in again if she decided to try and return to the lake. The night had fallen heavy as a hand, but a half-moon lifted edges. June parked where the ranger's ATV had turned from the road and walked the rutted track a long black mile. The stars assembled slower than she wanted them to. Out by the bowl that had been a town, voices carried, thin and thirsty. She thought for a second they were human. She listened more and knew they were not. The wind threaded the collapsed walls and made flute sounds. The reeds at the margin of the dying water wrote hieroglyphs. June walked past the blue tape markers, counting as she went, 1, 2, 3, 5, because 4 had been lost, 7. At the church, the boards were darker than the walls, as if they had drunk the night. Her breath made a small cloud. She pointed her flashlight low, not wanting to show the room what her hand could do. She stepped inside. The silt apologized underfoot. The recorder hung against her sternum and ticked its little ticks. The bell held its last note like a throat that will not clear. June set the flashlight on a pew and angled it so the beam made a plane across the red door. In that blade, dust like gold seeds spun and fell. "Ma," she said, and could not have said afterward whether it was a prayer or an invitation or a mistake. Outside, something splashed once. The sound came in and lay down at her feet like a dog. From behind the red boards, a finger tapped, gentle, then another, a third. The rhythm of someone bored in an office, or of someone waiting to be allowed out of a room where the air had been measured and allotted by men in tan uniforms who liked their lines straight. June put her palm to the paint. The cool moved into her. The wood sighed with a breath that felt borrowed. She thought of breaking it open. She thought of meeting. She thought of the way a cord is a ladder and how ladders go in 2 directions. "Don't," Alma said from behind her. Not old now, not weak, the word a rope thrown. June turned. The flashlight made a moon out of Alma's face. The old woman held a rope looped in her hand, real hemp, older than the dam. She tossed one end toward June. "Tie it around your waist," Alma said. "Names are hooks. Ropes are promises. If you go through that door, you had better be a person tied to another person, or you won't be any kind of person at all." June took the rope. It felt real, which is to say it bit a little. She wrapped it around herself twice, the knot so awkward it would have made a sailor weep. Alma shook her head and retied it with a practiced blankness of expression. "Now you're anchored." "To what?" June asked. "To me," Alma said simply. "To an old woman who remembers more than she wants. Maybe to a valley, to the way the air used to smell in September when the apples came in, to the taste of the water when it was sweet." She lifted her chin toward the boards. "You don't open it. You let it open." June waited. The recorder's timer ticked red numerals into the dark. The bell rang a fourth time that was not like the others, all the old iron of the world at once. In the wall, a seam widened without the courtesy of a sound of splitting. The dark behind it had a texture. The rope at June's waist took a fraction of her weight. As if she had leaned without moving, her mother's voice said, so small June had to lean closer to hear, "Little Reed," and sang a syllable that did not belong to any word June had learned, and made a note that was no note June could place on any scale she knew, and the space between the notes filled in like a body filling in a dress, like water finding the shape of a mouth that had not known until now what shape it was. June touched the crack with the tips of 2 fingers. The dark was cool and not cool, like skin under a sheet. The rope went tight. Behind her, Alma did not move. The old woman's weight, the only weight that made sense in a world that had stopped believing in gravity in the right places. The wall inhaled, and the song began again, but this time it knew her name. Chapter 2, The Mouth Learns the River. The wall inhaled, and the rope cinched June's waist in a small, honest pain that said, "Alive," said here. Her mother's syllable hung between the boards like a bead of water refusing to fall. The crack's dark did what dark does when it believes itself called. It came forward, not quickly. That would have been a mercy. It advanced like fog across a field, present before the eye knew it, until June felt an old memory tighten behind her eyes. The way she had stood as a child at the edge of a swimming pool, toes over tile, and known the water was not a surface so much as a second sky you could fall into if you forgot to be air. "Names," Alma whispered behind her. "Make a fence." June's mouth obeyed before June had decided. "An Hui, who fixes bikes on 17th, she said, voice shaking and firm at once. "Miss Patel, who saved all her rubber bands. Mr. Ortiz with the 1 blue shoe and 1 black. The twins who never tell anyone which is which. The bus driver who whistles off-key and doesn't know it. The woman at the cafe who burns her beans and swears she doesn't." The crack paused at the edges like a creature tasting wire. June felt the wall's breath lean, then steady, as if the room had been deciding whether it was a throat. "Good," Alma said, and the word lifted the knot against June's back as if approval had weight. "That's the edge. Their names are ours. Yours are a hedge." From the seam the choir began again, softer than at noon, the notes angled thin so they could pass through new spaces. The chord felt like a hand testing the fit of a glove. June tasted iron. The ring at her throat warmed. The shuttered window above them clicked once, the smallest warning the room knew to give. "You don't have to go closer," Alma said. "I know," June said, and stepped closer because the sentence had not said "should not." The rope touched the boards first and hummed, as if hemp remembered something water had taught it when it was still a plant. June pressed her 2 fingers into the seam. The cool was not cold. It was the kind of temperature you find under a wristwatch, where skin forgets sky. She felt the tiniest pressure from the other side, nothing like a grip, more like the weight of a syllable held in a mouth too long. Her mother's voice came again, now from inside the wall and from inside June's skull. which is the same place when the bones remember. Little reed, it said, and the second phrase arrived without breaking this time, clean as a bell. Do not answer with yourself. I don't understand, June whispered. But she did, in the old way that children understand rules before they know reasons. There is a difference between echo and reply. An echo spins you. A reply is an offering made of something that survives. If she sang back with the same note in the same voice, she would become corridor. She would become ladder. If she answered with something else, something crooked, something hers, the chord might not find purchase. She closed her eyes and thought of the first call she had recorded. Years ago, older women in a kitchen, inventing a harmony out of misremembered verses, and the pots boil. They had sung wrong together until it was right. June opened her mouth and gave the wall a note with a bruise in it, the way a peach has sweetness that tastes of the tree that bent under it. It was an A, but it was not the A the choir had asked for. It wobbled. It carried the smell of burnt coffee and morning buses. A small city's ordinary mercy dragged like a net. The seam narrowed one hair's width. Alma's breath left her in something like a laugh, something like a sob. "That's it," she said, reverent and fierce. "Sing crooked." "My mother," June began. "Told you that," Alma finished. "She told us all not to sing straight." The wall changed the key. It found the curve. Names poured through the crack. Lucy, Ben, Father Jonas, Mary Claire, Teague, Thon, which had been her mother's name before a man behind a desk misheard and wrote Thanh and then Vivian on her residency card because he liked the old movie stars and thought he was doing her a favor. The name came with the weight of a young woman's shoulders, a shift damp at the collarbone, a hymnal smudged at the corners where fingers had turned the same pages too often. June tasted her mother's breath, the way a child tastes soap when a mother moves close to say, "Brush harder." "Why did you paint it red?" June asked. "Because questions are also fences sometimes." "So the wall would remember itself a door," Alma said. "Paint learns. It takes longer than names, but it learns. Father used the old trim paint from the Rook house after we pulled the door off its hinges and put it here to be an argument the water had to think about. Did it work?" For a while, Alma's mouth made a shape that used to accommodate a cigar and now accommodated air. We kept it shut through 3 springs when the lake was high. Then a dry summer like this, and the water stepped back, and the air grew hungry, and the boards loosened. Absence is a kind of want. They remembered there was a door and that we had named it. Names are hooks. They learned ours. June pressed her ear to the seam. The wall did not bite. It breathed in a slow counting way that put numbers in June's blood. 3, 5, 7. A pattern making itself inevitable. "What do you want?" she asked. And the question did not sound like the questions she asked in interviews, the ones designed to invite stories without injuring anyone. "From the seam, we want a room again." June's throat closed. "You have one," she said, almost angry, because fear sometimes borrows that coat when it wants to go out. "We want a room on this side," the choir said without saying. "We want to sit at a table and turn a page and find the same page again tomorrow. We want spoons that remember what they last held. We want the air to keep our breath and give it back warm. We want to be the ones who decide whether the door opens. We want to be the ones who choose what we call loss." "They want bodies," Alma said flat. "They want yours." "I don't want," June began. "Want has never been necessary," Alma said. "When the lake came, no one asked our want either. That's not a complaint. It's a measurement." The rope tugged so gently June almost missed it. She looked down, and for a heartbeat her eyes made a mistake. It was not a rope, but a umbilical, slick, pulsing. Then the light admitted the lie. Hemp, real, old, a promise pretending to be a cord, pretending to be a yes. She thought of cutting it and hated herself for thinking it. She thought of tying another knot. She thought of names until the rope felt again like a rope. "Why me?" June asked the seam. "Because you were named here," the wall breathed. "Because your mother taught the room your mouth before you grew letters." June tasted dust. "We left," she said, like a child arguing with a parent who remembers differently. The choir did not answer that. From far across the silt, something buckled. A basement wall remembered itself and failed. A hollow thump, a pause, the little applause of falling things. In the quiet afterwards, June heard voices that were not the choir. Ragged. "Human, where are you going? You can't be out here. Jesus, Mary, it's midnight. Are you drunk, adolescent? Brave?" Flashlight beams joined the moon in making lines across the nave. 3 boys, 2 tall and 1 stout, ducked through the vestibule hole, their shoes leaving oblong signatures in the silt. "Hey," one said, thrilled and trying not to sound it. "Holy, is that a lady?" said the stout one, who had good eyes. "2 ladies." He lifted his phone. "We came for TikTok, but this is—" He lifted his phone higher to prove he belonged. "Turn that off," Alma said, but she did not shout. She said it like a person instructing someone where to put a spoon in a drawer. Her voice made the boys' shoulders lower without their consent. They obeyed without deciding to. The tallest boy flicked the light off and then on again. Treachery of habit. He was handsome now, and would grow handsome in a way that would be some and not enough. He squinted at the red boards as if they were a puzzle he could solve if only he looked with the right part of his eyes. "You don't sing," Alma told them. "We're not singing," said the stout boy. Defensiveness a preface. "We're just, like, documenting, for awareness." His voice betrayed his mother. It softened on his vowels. The seam widened by the width of a thumbnail. The wall liked bodies. The wall liked breath. The wall had been patient longer than these boys had been alive. June felt the rope choose sides. It chose her. She pulled the coil up and looped it around a pew foot so that the knot bit wood. "You have to go," she told the boys. "Now, this is not content." "Everything is content," the handsome one said, but his voice lost some of its cleverness at the edges. "What is it?" "A ladder," Alma said, "and you are mouths. Go." "You can't talk to," the stout boy began, and then the choir found the note it had needed, the one that cut where a boy's chest has not yet decided whether to be armor or window. The boy's mouth opened without his permission. A sound no one had taught him floated out, small, perfect, the kind of note that would make a mother look up from stirring and smile because what a pretty thing. June caught his arm without gentleness and squeezed the muscle hard enough to leave a memory. "Names," she snapped at him. "Say your mother's name." The boy frowned at her, as if she had asked him to take off his shoes in the wrong house. "Hue," he said obediently, and the note pushed against his teeth and stopped as if it had recognized a different kind of door. "Again," Alma said. And he did, and the other 2 boys, who did not yet know how to be good, repeated their mothers' names like boys cheating on a test because the answer was easy and new. The seam thinned like a lip tightening. "There we are," Alma said with a satisfaction that held grief in its back pocket. "Out! But what is it?" the tall boy said, quieter now, in the true way of questions asked at night. "Away," June said. "Where?" he asked. "Between," Alma said, And you don't belong there yet." The boys looked at one another. The handsome one swallowed. The stout one, who would be kind in a grocery store a decade from now and let someone go ahead of him with no content at all, tucked his phone deep into his pocket and shook his head once, hard, to throw off whatever scrap of song still stuck to him. "Okay," he said. "Cool. Sorry." They backed out the way you leave a sleeping animal. The last one tripped and laughed, and then did not laugh because the church asked him not to. When their footsteps had faded, the seam exhaled as if taking back a small portion of what it had tried to spend. The room steadied in the way of a boat when the wave that wanted it changes its mind. "You brought something," Alma said to June. Not a question. Her old eyes were looking at the recorder. June held it up. "Words," she said. "Sounds. The shapes they make when the mouth doesn't know if it wants to be a door." "Play it wrong," Alma said. June scrolled with careful fingers until she found the 10-second clip of the water clicking and the choir sampling itself through the hydrophone like dolphins at a bad frequency. She put the recorder on the pew and turned the speaker toward the red boards. The first phrase lifted into the nave, thin, perfect. On the repeat, she pitched it down half a step, then a whole, a sacrilege that felt like learning to lie for a good reason. The third time, she reversed it. The note unfurled backwards, word becoming breath, breath becoming silence. The wall paused in the small astonishment of being offered a past in front of itself. "They don't like going backward," Alma said with a small, mean pleasure. "Drowned don't like to reverse. They prefer their tragedies chronological." "Do you hate them?" June asked. "I miss them," Alma said, and in the willingness of the admission was an answer to another question. The seam relaxed. The breath behind the boards became an exhale, long, like a body saying, "All right," and a voice that had been too close a moment ago moved away a step, giving June the first gift it had in it, distance. "Go home," Alma said. "Sleep while the room remembers itself shut. Come back when the light can see its own hands." June did not argue because she was tired down to the little rocks in her bones that other people called joints. She made the rope into a new knot, as if closure could be taught by demonstration, and they left together the way people leave a sickbed, backward, whispering from habit, even though the sleeper cannot hear. Outside, the lake once more pretended to be a lake under the moon. The reservoir's shore shone raw. The boys' footprints went one way, theirs went another. A frog made a sound like a wrong violin. June's car tasted like heat when she put her hand on the door. Alma refused the passenger seat with a small, stubborn tilt of chin and chose the back. "I ride where I can watch both of you," she said, and June did not ask whom the second you was. They drove through the kind of night that makes towns feel like secrets. The motel sign stuttered VACNCY. June parked and turned to thank Alma and saw no shock, just recognition that the seat was empty, that a length of old rope lay coiled on the worn upholstery like a sleeping thing. June touched it. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was rope. In her room, she laid the rope across the dresser and put the recorder beside it and told herself the room was 4 things: bed, chair, bathroom, door. She made a list of those 4 with a free hotel pen. She taped the list to the wall. Naming, fence. She sat and wrote phrases that had nothing to do with grants or pitch decks. Sing crooked, names are hooks, paint learns, a cord is a ladder. She slept with the ring under her tongue because fear had made superstition reasonable, and because she wanted to taste the metal if it warmed. to know her mother by temperature, if nothing else. In the hour before dawn, when birds decide the world deserves a second chance, the ring lifted itself like a hunted minnow and pressed up against the back of her teeth. A voice came pleasantly, like a radio from the other room. "Baby," her mother said, not admonishment but wonder. "You kept my voice somewhere it could find itself." June sat up too fast and the room swam. "I didn't," she began, then realized the argument made no sense. She had kept it on tapes and hard drives and in the body's silly coral. She had kept and avoided and used it as a light and a danger. "You have to remember me wrong," her mother said almost cheerfully. "Just a little." "What?" "You have to sing me crooked, honeysuckle. If you keep me exact, they can borrow me. If you keep me wrong, I am yours." Her mother laughed the way she had laughed once when a sparrow had made itself a nest in their mailbox. "The truth is a door. You can love me better off by half a step." June wept in a way that did not notice itself. "I don't know how." "You just did," her mother said. "Eat breakfast." The voice went like a radio at the end of the dial, suddenly static where there had been song. She stayed awake because she could either sleep or watch the light come, and she wanted to see the light take the room back. Morning slid like a transparent hand along the motel carpet. She ate a banana that had grown freckles overnight and tasted of nothing. She drove to the reservoir with coffee that pretended to be coffee. When she turned off the blacktop, the ranger's truck was parked above the access road, dust softened by dew. He stood beside it with his thermos, looking at the valley the way a man might look at a photograph of himself he could not remember consenting to. "You can't be out here," he said, automatically. "I know," June said. And then, because what else was there to do with the truth, she added, "I was." He eyed the hydrophone coil looped over her shoulder, the recorder case, the rope at her hand. His eyes flicked to the rope and stayed there for a breath. "That from your grandma's barn?" he asked, joking to see if something real would come back. "From a woman who refused the passenger seat," June said. He considered this and decided that whatever he had imagined happening had indeed happened. "They got a call at the sheriff's about kids," he said. "Took a video of some silly," said the church was breathing. "The sheriff asked me if I felt it. I told him what I always tell them." "What do you always tell them?" "That the lake's a prankster," he sipped. "To be a valley is to be a good sport." They went down together, walking the line of blue tape as if it were a rule that deserved respect. In the morning, the church was almost pretty, its ruin groomed by light. Dust drifted at a leisurely hour. Wasps inspected rafters. The red boards looked less ominous and more like any door someone had made too thick because they were overcautious or because fear had been fashionable that season. And June put her hand to the paint. Cool, not cold, not breath. She waited. The wall did not inhale because the wall did not need to. The wall had lungs it could use when it wanted, and now it did not want. "I need to ask you something," June said to the room, "and also I need to tell you a thing you will not like." The ranger glanced at her as if measuring whether this was about religion. "Ought I wait outside?" "He is see, please," June said. And he did, because there are requests that sound like prayers, even to men in hats. June stood alone with the red boards and the silt. She placed the recorder on the pew as if setting a chalice. She took the ring off its chain and held it cupped as if offering water to a bird. "I can carry you," she said to the seam. "Your names, I mean. I can take them into a place where they will not be only paper. I can put them on tongues that will outlast us." She thought of the old women in the kitchen, the boys at midnight. But I cannot give you a room, not the kind you want. Not on this side, not all the way. The honesty cost like an old wound reopening. It stung with familiar salt. Her mother's voice came small, which is how you know something is real and not only your desperation. Good, it said. Thank you for being stingy, the choir murmured. An assembly before a vote. Alma's name rose among the others. Not a living Alma, but an Alma that had turned the rope around and tied herself to the other side and stayed because someone had to watch. June didn't turn around. She knew better now. If she looked, the room would arrange itself into a shape that would live behind her eyes and lead her later where she could not afford to go. Sing us wrong, the choir said. June stood with the ring in her palm and thought about the ethics of inaccuracy. She thought about the difference between lie and myth, and how one eats truth and the other eats the world and gives you back something digestible. She took a breath. She sang the hymn her mother had loved, Street Bridget's Well, and she ruined it. She put a blue note where there had never been one. She hurried the line where it wanted to linger and lingered where it wanted to hurry. She added a word in Vietnamese that didn't belong to the meter and kept it, one syllable fat as a plum in a basket of apples. She made the tune forget which parish it had belonged to. When her voice broke, she did not correct it. The wall accepted the ugly gift like a saint accepting a dented apple, with gratitude, because hunger has no pride. The seam did not widen. It did not close. It did not need to. What moved instead was pressure. The want in the room eased half a notch. The bell that was no bell did not ring because the room did not need to count itself this morning. The names behind the board said their names out of order and then in no order at all, which is how the living say them when no one is measuring attendance. The ranger poked his head in the hole. You good? Yes, June said. No, she added, because both can be true, and she had decided to become a person who trafficked in both. I need a can of paint, she said. Red. Paint doesn't have a soul, the ranger said, quoting, which means he had listened earlier when he'd pretended not to. But it's the best we can do. He nodded and left to fetch it. Alma appeared, or didn't, but June felt the room take a posture that meant Alma. I will sit, said that posture. I will watch the door until it remembers itself again that it is a door and not a mouth. Who painted it first? June asked out loud. Father Jonas, said the posture. And then, after a pause that changed the meaning, and your mother, because he said his hand shook worse than hers. It is, he said some. June closed her fist around the ring until it pressed a circle into her palm. She felt the imprint with her other hand as if it had been pressed there by someone else. She didn't tell me. She told you not to sing straight, Alma said dryly. You only just learned what that meant. The ranger returned with a can, bright as candy, the label promising impossible things: coverage, stain blocking, forgiveness. June took the brush and dipped it. The paint's first stroke made a sound like someone writing a word they enjoy writing because the shape pleases their hand. Alma hummed. The wall did not protest because paint is slower than argument, and the wall respected any craft that took more than one morning. What you doing officially? The ranger asked. Conversational, which is the way men speak when they do not want to spook deer, and also not spook whatever you are. Sealing a story with a story, June said. You gonna write it? He asked, sympathetic and suspicious. He did not say sell it, but the word landed anyway and minded its manners. I'm going to record it wrong, June said. Good, he said, surprising them both. He watched her lay another card of red into the seam. We'll keep people out today. Kids, treasure hunters. He rolled his shoulders as if he could already feel the paperwork. We'll say there's rebar. There's always rebar. She painted until the can told her stop. The red found its own level. The line between new and old wavered, a tide mark for a different flood. When she leaned back, her wrist spattered. The boards looked like a door again, not a wound and not a bargain, just a thing that could be opened and closed by hands knowing themselves hands. She took out the notebook and wrote the names she had caught, the ones that had laid themselves on her tongue and stayed. Alma's daughter, Father Jonas, Miriam, Thomas, Thon, others that would arrive later as she boiled rice and remembered a syllable she had put down somewhere under thought. She wrote them with joy that hurt and with pain that did not, because pain is not a single thing and she would stop pretending it is. She drew a small wrong grace note above her mother's name because mercy should be diagrammed when you can. At the motel, she packed. She drove north first and then east, then pulled over and turned south because sometimes the map in the hands is a liar and the map in the chest is the only one that can count. In a library 2 towns away, she sat at a terminal and requested the microfilm for the town paper the week the notices went out. She fed quarters into the machine like an altar. She watched names appear and blur, appear and blur. She wrote down the way the reporter had misspelled them, even as she wrote down the right ones, because ghosts are pragmatic. They will take what they can get. She cut the audio that night in a kitchen where a woman had rented her a room for cash. The woman knocked once to ask if June wanted tea, and then again to ask if June was crying. June said yes both times and took the tea and kept the tears. She pulled the hymn like taffy, made syllables into breath, into weather. She layered the boys' mothers' names under the choir's wrong key and laid the rope's friction at the end. She called the piece Lakeside Proper, and then deleted the title because titles are doors and you should be careful which ones you name. She printed a single page on the kitchen printer, Don't Sing Back. It said, in a font too serious for the words, and the exact seriousness the words required. She wrote a line below it in her own hand that was no one's but resembled her mother's in its refusal to be neat, or, if you must, sing wrong. In the morning, she drove back to the reservoir and slid the page into a plastic sleeve because plastic will outlast saints, then nailed it to a post the ranger had set, the blue tape fluttering like a cheap miracle. The ranger watched, hat in hand. He said nothing because decent men can learn. The boys watched from the guardrail, pretending not to, pretending to be there for anything except the reason they were there. June stood and listened to the wall not breathing and to the breath in her own lungs that depended on air. Some maple had exhaled 3 miles away. She lifted the recorder, began to speak the day, then stopped, set it down. She did not need to keep everything. Some things could be left to the room that now remembered itself again as a room. The bell rang once, far. It did not ring from the church. It rang from somewhere in the valley, the way thunder sometimes makes you believe you know the shape of far hills. It traveled through her mouth, the way sound had learned it could. Her ring was cool against her chest. Her mother said nothing, which in some languages is a blessing so large it looks like weather. On the drive out, the ranger asked if she had gotten what she came for. I came for something that wasn't mine, June said. I'm leaving with something that is. That a riddle? He asked amiably. That a life, she said, and smiled in a way that would crack later at a stoplight when she would have to choose whether to turn left toward a job that needed something tidy or right toward a story that would not. She would cry on the green. A woman would honk once, gentle as if to say, "I see you." The light would hold. Before the blacktop joined the highway, June pulled over by a diner that could be any diner. She ordered an omelet that tasted of a plan someone had made to be kind. At the next table, a man told a woman he thought all the water should go where people want to boat and none where they want to bury their dead, and the woman said, without looking up, "That's not how grief works, Cal." June laughed into her omelet and nearly choked. She drank water that had learned somebody else's pipes. She wrote another list. Call editor, send pitch, request archive footage, text sister. She added a name she had not written yet, because sometimes you save the smallest for last, like the good part of the meal. Alma. She texted the unknown number. "The door is painted. Thank you." A reply came hours later when the afternoon had gone gold at the edges. "You're welcome, little Reed. Watch your vowels." She drove until the reservoir was a rumor in the rear view. The radio was nothing, then static, then a voice tall as the sky saying traffic and weather on the nines. She turned it off. She sang her mother's song wrong, low, private, and the wrongness felt like fidelity, and the fidelity felt like breath, and the breath felt like the first day in a valley, after someone wrote a bureaucrat's name and the water rose and people moved and somebody said we will be lakeside and somebody else said we will go back, and they did, not to empty it but to measure it with their mouths and find a room there they could leave, because leaving a room is also a way of keeping it. At her apartment days later, with the plants thirsty and indignant, June uploaded a cut labeled V5 Final, which would not be final. She wrote the show notes with too many commas because grief requires lists and stutters. She published and then unpublished. She put the rope in her closet, not on a hook but coiled on the floor, a sleeping shape that did not need to be displayed to be true. She called her sister and did not say the word mother. They talked about rice and landlords. June listened to her sister laugh, a crooked note, blessedly off. That night, just before sleep, there came a sound from the wall behind her bed, a fingertip sliding along paint. She did not sit up. She lay her palm flat on the plaster and said, very quietly, a wrong version of her own name. The wall was polite. It did not answer with itself. In the morning, she woke with a crease on her palm where the ring had pressed. She kissed the mark like a fool or a priest or a daughter. She made coffee and burned it on purpose. She laughed when it tasted bad. She put on her shoes. She went to work. She carried with her a list of names that would grow, a song that would refuse to be right, and a knowledge that a chord is a ladder, and ladders go both ways. And you are a person if, and only if, you tie yourself to another person before you climb. On a winter afternoon months later, when rain finally came in a solid sheet, and the reservoir took the valley back into its mouth with the relief of a body given water after fasting, June returned. The guardrail wore a silk of rain. The ranger's hat leaked and he pretended not to notice. The red boards were entirely under water, a square of darker water within water, like a thought prayer makes in the mind when spoken without sound. June stood on the new shoreline, which was the old shoreline, which belonged to no one who could be paid. The bell did not ring. The rain sang wrong in 1,000 keys, which is the only way rain knows. She did not try to hear her mother because this was not a place for trying. This was a place for being the kind of vessel that spills and still carries. She dropped a rope loop into the water and watched it fill and sink and disappear, not as an offering and not as an apology, but as a measure, a line that remembered both bank and boat. On the drive home, the road was a ribbon she could have tied into anything. She sang to the wipers. She did not sing back. She sang forward. And somewhere under a surface that was not a surface but another sky, a choir took a breath and rested, phrases unsaid gathering weight, names living without hooks for a little while longer, while the paint remembered and the board swelled, and a door not meant to open today stayed shut with the dignity of a promise that has learned to keep itself. When she reached the city, the street lights wrote their usual ordinary constellations, and June read them the way a child reads a map grown into muscle. She parked and climbed the stairs and put her ear to her apartment door because listening is a habit. On the other side, a kettle hummed because a neighbor had left it and was returning now. A radio told somebody else's weather. Someone laughed wrong the way we do when we are too tired to aim. June unlocked her door. The room breathed once, the harmless breath rooms have when they are empty. She stepped inside. She placed the ring on the little dish by the sink where keys clink and coins go to think. She whispered the names she had learned that were not hers and the names that were. She sang bad. She meant it. And in the walls, the ones in her mouth, the ones remembered by paint 5 towns away, the ones that hold up air and give it back, the choir answered not with themselves, but with something nearly like silence, the mercy that keeps rooms and doors and daughters in their bodies, singing forward under a sky that sometimes remembers it is water and sometimes mercifully does not.